Hi there, thank you so much for joining me today. My name's Natasha, welcome to my channel. This video is a part 2 to a video that I did about a month ago or 6 weeks ago where I discussed how many times I've used certain eyeshadows that had pan in them. In that first video, I discussed the difference in formulas between Makeup Geek, Anastasia Beverly Hills, Zoeva, a Clayona single, and also a couple shades from the Too Faced Bonbons palette. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the colored Raine formula, the Too Faced formula but from a different palette, and the Shroud Cosmetics formula, specifically their pastels. In that first video, I discussed a lot of factors of what it takes to hit pan on an eyeshadow and why that number is so incredibly different for everybody, and why that number even changes for me over the years depending on my makeup preferences and my makeup style. So I do ask you to take my information with a grain of salt because no one's numbers are going to be exactly the same. I'm not directly telling you this is how many uses it takes to hit pan on an eyeshadow. I'm really just using the information I have to better discuss the difference between formulas, between different brands, and even different finishes within the same brand. Now let's start with colored Raine. I'm going to be talking about shades specifically from the Queen of Hearts palette. This is easily one of my favorite eyeshadow palettes that I own, and I just love the color story. I love the shades in here, and I think the formula is really great. It's definitely a different formula. The mattes are a little bit more hard pressed, and some of the deeper shades do take some getting used to. I especially had a lot of trouble with Ladyship here. It's a really deep purple. It is a drier color, and I did have a lot of trouble at first making it look the way I wanted it to on the lids, but after working with it for a little bit, I found what works for me, and I ended up really loving this palette. I have done some looks with this palette, specifically with this purple here. It was last November. If I can find it, I will link it in the cards. I have a shade on a duochrome, on a shimmer shade, and on a matte. So I thought it would be good to discuss the difference between the formulas. Let's start with Crown here, which is that duochrome. This one has like a white base. It looks white in the pan, but it does have a peachy shift to it. And I use this mainly on the inner corner. It is a little bit of a chunkier formula, and I don't find that it's very smooth or pigmented on the lids. I find that with most duochrome shades that have a white base, even from other formulas, and so I really only just use them on the inner corner because with the way whenever I move my face you can kind of see the shift a little bit better, but it's still like brightening enough to have on the inner corner. This one took 55 uses to hit pan. I was using a smaller detailed brush to get the inner corner of my eye, and I really was only focusing on the center there. So even though this is what I would consider to be a little bit more of a crumbly formula, I still feel like 55 uses is a lot whenever you're really only focusing on one part of the pan. I had very similar results with Ladyship here, which is that purple matte I was talking about. This took 54 uses to hit pan on. I am pretty surprised about that because once I figured out how to make the eyeshadow work for me in a way that I really liked on my eyes, I was using a lot of it. I was using it in the crease, on the outer corner, on the lower lash line, and I was really packing it on. So I was using a lot of product. But even so, it took 54 uses to hit pan. And the last one is Noblewoman, which is a gorgeous burgundy shimmer, and I love this shade. I cannot speak highly enough about the shade selection in this palette, specifically for my tastes. This one actually only took 33 uses to hit pan. I think a portion of that is because the way I focused on the eyeshadow, I was focusing on the edge instead of directly in the center, and I think that makes it easier to hit pan on eyeshadows for the most part when you're only focusing on one corner or one side of it. Whenever I did wear Noblewoman, I would sometimes wear it on the outer third and in the crease and on the lower lash line to make it kind of a burgundy look, but a lot of times I would wear this all over the lid, so every time I was reaching for it, I was reaching for a lot. And I do think that the shimmer formula compared to the matte and the duochrome, it is a little bit easier to hit pan on. I think it's just like a creamier formula in general. So those are the numbers for my Queen of Hearts palette. Let's move on to the Shroud Cosmetics formula, and I'm specifically talking about the pastel shades because this is a pastel palette. And I did talk about this a little bit in my first video where I discussed a pastel shade from ColourPop. I think pastels, because of the formulation, are just easier to hit pan on. From all the pastel shades that I've used in the past, a lot of them are more loosely pressed and just have more kick up. I don't know if it's because of the amount of white pigment that's usually in pastels or what. And obviously with pastels, I do need to apply more because it's a lighter shade, and so in order to get the pigmentation I want, I do usually have to build it up quite a bit. So the first one I want to talk about is Strawberry Milk here. If you look at the pan, it's actually quite deep. I feel like a lot of the eyeshadow is gone, and I did end up using this 38 times before hitting pan. The reason for that is because I also used it as a blush, so I was using more product obviously to cover a larger amount of my face, and I was using a larger brush to grab it. In comparison, Planchette, which is a lilac-y cool toned purple pastel, this one only took 22 uses to hit pan. I really love this shade, and so when I did wear it, I would wear it all over the lid, in the crease, lower lash line. I would wear it everywhere. I was using a ton of it. And I think just because I was focusing on the center more so than on Strawberry Milk, in general it just took fewer uses to hit pan. But I do think that there is more product left in Planchette than in Strawberry Milk. The next shade is Creep It Real, which is this pastel aqua green color. And this one, for me personally in this palette, this was the crumbly shade. It had the most kick up, and it was really difficult not to have just a ton of kick up every time you used it. I had similar issues with Divinity from the Too Faced palette. I would try to pick up just enough product and it would kick up more product, and I would try to pick up the kick up and it would just create more kick up, and it was just difficult to contain how much powder came out of the shadow every time I tried to use it. The way I loved to use this the most was on the lower lash line, so I did use a thinner brush to grab just right out of the middle. This one took 21 uses to hit pan, and I think the main reason for that was because of how I was using it and the type of brush, but also this is just an incredibly powdery shadow, and so when I was using it, a lot of kick up was happening and I was only able to salvage so much of it. And the last shade from this palette I want to talk about is Third Eye. It's this orange in the corner. I loved pairing it with Issues from ColourPop. I would use the ColourPop shade as a transition, and then I would go in and deepen up the crease with this just to make that orange really pop. I loved that combination. This one took 27 uses to hit pan. So really quickly, I wanted to talk about the lowest and highest numbers really quick. You have Creep It Real, which I hit pan in 21 uses, and then Strawberry Milk I hit pan in 38 uses. So you're looking at a difference of 17 uses to hit pan on one shade, even though it's the same formula from the same brand. I thought that was pretty interesting. And the last palette I want to talk about is from Too Faced. It's the Natural Nudes palette. I have pan on 3 shades in this palette, 2 mattes and 1 kind of duochrome shimmer shade. The duochrome Glistening Snow is very similar to Crown from the Queen of Hearts palette. It does have a lighter kind of cream base, and then it has kind of like a yellowy peachy shift to it. It's really pretty, and once again I use this mainly on the inner corner. I didn't really use it on the lid that much because it is a crumbly shade that doesn't give me the type of finish that I want on the lids. Glistening Snow took 34 uses. Let's discuss the difference in size of pans really quick. The shades from the Queen of Hearts palette are 1.5 grams, and the smaller ones from the Too Faced palette are half of a gram. So these are a third of the size of the ones that you get from the Queen of Hearts palette. It took me fewer uses to hit pan on the Too Faced shade versus the Queen of Hearts shade, even though they have very similar formulas and I use them for very similar things. Just because the Too Faced one is a third of the size from the Queen of Hearts. So I had a lot less product to go through in order to hit pan on the bottom. The mattes, however, are a different story. The mattes are double the size of the smaller ones because they are 1 gram and the square pans are half of a gram. For Swan, I did end up hitting pan on this relatively easily. It took 38 uses to hit pan. I used it just to set my under eyes and sometimes to brighten up the lower lash line a little bit. And when you look at the pan, I've actually used quite a bit of the product in there. I think if I used it another 38 times, this shade would be almost gone. That makes sense. I do use a fluffier brush whenever I use cream shades like this. I'm using a lot more product because I'm covering the entirety of my lid, and I'm using enough to create like a set barrier between the primer and the eyeshadows I'm going to put on top. Now for this shade here, Cocoa, this is another matte. This one really surprised me. I was trying to hit pan on it in my Pan Those Eyeshadows project, and I figured it would be like any other matte chocolate brown that I've tried to hit pan on in the past. I I use that pretty regularly. I use it in the crease, on the outer third, on the lower lash line. I can use it all over the lid, everywhere, to create kind of like a chocolatey smoky eye. I didn't think this one was going to be much of a problem, but because this formula, the mattes from this palette specifically, have virtually no fallout and they're very creamy and very pigmented, I really didn't need a lot, even if I was creating a very, very brown, chocolatey brown look. This one took 51 uses to hit pan, and if you can see, I haven't used nearly as much of the product in the pan as I did Swan. So I have more uses on this shade and less product used up versus Swan that I used fewer times and used up more product. So part of me was curious if this was a palette that I was going to use regularly and hit pan on and use up relatively quickly. Especially being $45, it is a more expensive palette and you're not getting as much product. But I do feel much better about it because these shades are going to take a long time to hit pan. Like, to use up a ton of that to finish that shadow, I would have to use it like 1,000 times. So that does make me feel better, even though the product is less because of the way the formula is. It takes a long time to actually use up an eyeshadow from this palette. So as I continue to hit pan on different shades and try different formulas and brands, either through my own makeup use or through my Pan Those Eyeshadows project, I'm sure I could create a part 3 to this video relatively soon. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. Through your own makeup use, do you have any information like this that you would like to share with us? Anything you've noticed between brands or different types of shades, different formulas, etc.? I would love to hear it. I'm always curious to see if anybody else has information that they can share like that with me. But in the meantime, that's everything I have. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in my next video.